Hi, everyone. I'm Satyen Pathak from ProcureAbility, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. In today's session, we're going to discuss the role of leadership in procurement's AI-ready future. And every procurement forum, be it conference, C-level meetings, vendor-customer conversation, everything focuses on AI nowadays. And the conversation typically goes around AI technology, AI strategy, implementation plans, as well as roadblocks. But in today's session, we're going to focus less on technology in itself and more on role of leadership in driving this agenda, and particularly how this role is going to be critical in deciding who wins this AI race. But before I go on, let me introduce my co-presenter, Kelly Barner from AOP, who spends considerable amount of time with procurement leaders on these very challenges and opportunities they are facing. Welcome, Kelly.
Absolutely, Satyen. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody who's either joining us as we stream live or might have caught this later and is watching it on demand.
Cool. So, Kelly, I'm thinking let's start with the fundamental question, right? Why has AI become a leadership challenge? It's literally a defining challenge for leadership. I think it starts in my mind, and again, would love to get your thoughts, but in my mind, it starts with why and how currently AI is being approached. And we have these conversations again and again with procurement leaders, and the conversation invariably starts like this: we need AI strategy. How do we implement AI? And whether it needs to start at that point or whether it needs to be on implementation, I think the key missing piece is business problem. Don't you think?
I do think so. And I think part of what makes AI a particularly difficult leadership challenge is that, a lot of times leadership is, okay, we're going to get the team across the river, or we're going to get the team down the street to this new location. You know where you're going and you know what you need to do in order to motivate people to prepare, to make the journey, to arrive successfully at the other end. With AI, there is so much that is unknown today, and it's all changing so quickly that it's almost like it's a more pure study in leadership, because all you really have at any given time are the principles and the guiding values of what sort of leadership culture you're trying to create, because absolutely nobody knows for sure where we're going to be even 6 or 8 months from now in terms of where the capability is at scale and how procurement teams are using it.
Absolutely. And it almost feels like this AI technology is so overwhelming that people have started forgetting about the basic questions of, okay, what is the business problem we are trying to solve? What's the ROI? What's business case for implementing it? And then it also feels to me like, okay, every problem seems to lead to a AI solution, and that need not be the case. And I think we have read the stories of companies burning through their annual AI budget in one quarter,
Yes.
and with very little to show for it. So it's upon us as leaders, and I'm just including myself, like to answer these difficult questions, obviously asking them first and answering those. I think there are multiple challenges to dimensions to this challenge, but I think ultimately goal in my mind is leadership now has to step up and obviously ask these difficult questions, but take a pragmatic approach, which is business centric, which is again even humane as well as pragmatic. So I think that's where the challenge is beginning. And I think while leadership is becoming a key bottleneck, I think another thing that in my mind is not seen or at least acknowledged is the readiness challenge.
Mm. Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I think it is to procurement's credit that we've approached AI with such enthusiasm. And I think it's interesting, you start talking about budgets and spend. Okay, now you're in our sweet spot. But it really is sort of two parallel challenges, I think, for procurement right now. And both of them have a leadership element to them. One, of course, is how is the expectation for any given person's role? How will our process flows change? Where will we be leveraging the capabilities of either generative or agentic AI? But then there's also that token spend management challenge where, in addition to figuring out how it's changing our daily jobs and the processes that we work through, it's also popped up a completely new pocket of spend that at the same time we have to be figuring out how to manage, how to budget for, how to help the business design the types of business outcomes they're looking to get from it so that we can help with ROI calculations. I think
Yeah,
government has not held back, right? We have, in some cases, led the way in terms of adoption and experimentation. I do have a sense, and maybe this is where it brings us back to leadership, that we're at a moment right now in terms of the maturity curve where, yes, experimentation is still wonderful. And as the functionality continues to change, as the impact continues to change, we will need to continue experimenting. But in order to drive desired outcomes at scale, we do need to get something a little bit more fixed so that we're moving out of that experimentation phase and actually through, just like any other implementation that procurement would know how to manage. I think we've reached something of a tipping point where if we want to have some long-term results to show for our work, we have to start getting some of this rolled out at scale and not just get stuck in a perpetual cycle of testing.
I agree. And we did our own as well as partnered surveys, and invariably, one thing that comes up is there are still only 20% or so organizations who have moved from pilots to the scale. And I keep wondering like why that has been. And I think leadership has a lot to contribute there because I think one is as we talked about, right? There hasn't been a practical, robust, and even brutally honest assessment of where you are. People are like organizations are jumping into this whole AI bandwagon. And the other thing is, I understand there is obviously CPOs are not operating in vacuum. There is pressure from CEOs, boards,
Oh, yes.
stakeholders, and obviously there is this whole shiny object of AI. So all that is contributing to it. But I think leaders now are at, as you said, are at the tipping point where they need to now ask those difficult questions and kind of take pragmatic approach of where AI can be applied and how ready they are.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting, and especially when you start to bring the CEO and the board into it. I think this is one of those moments where procurement gets an opportunity to simply step up and occupy the space we've always wanted. At Art of Procurement, we try to stay away from the phrase, get a seat at the table. We try to kind of stay away from that. But this is a moment. This is a moment where, yes, these hard questions have to be asked. Some form of concrete guidance has to be issued that allows people to have the confidence to
Yeah.
make decisions at various levels. But maybe procurement needs to play an active two-way role in that conversation to say, okay, thanks, CEO and board. You've told us to be enthusiastic. You've given us some level of governance parameters that we have to stay inside of. But what do you really want us working towards? What is the end goal here from your perspective so that we can translate into, okay, so then from a supplier or spend or contract management standpoint, that means we should prioritize X. I think there does have to
Absolutely.
be some level of, I don't know, let's say tactical clarity that takes
Yeah.
all of this past enthusiasm, past, as you said, sort of shiny object syndrome, and allows us
Yeah.
to get from strategy to impact. Something somewhere in there has to be concrete. And that's a form of leadership too, is stepping up to be the ones to say, nope, we are perfectly ready and enthusiastic to execute on this for you, but we have some questions too, that we would love to get some answers on.
Absolutely. And that's to me kind of goalpost statement. Like, okay, what's the goalpost? And it's probably needs to be asked first to the CEOs and then at the same time introspection as to okay, where does procurement want to go? But I also feel, Kelly, there are a couple of other dimensions. One is you need to know goalpost, but you also need to know where you are. And that to my mind is it sounds so basic, but in our conversations we see it's getting missed all the time. You There is an organization we were talking to, they were on-prem, like on-premise technology solutions, and the question is okay, how do we move to AI? I mean, there is a long journey for you to be
Yes.
traveled, right? And that realization has to be there. It doesn't matter where your starting point is. The fact of self-awareness is really critical. And I think we have kind of thought about multiple dimensions to this self-awareness or current state understanding. Obviously, data is big in our mind, and we come across this all the time. That probably is going to be foundational. Second is process, yes. Um, People, which we'll probably talk about later. Governance. I mean, governance is going to be two-layered. One is what is the
Right.
organizational governance model in terms of AI, and it's becoming so critical in the, especially when there are these regulatory interventions that are coming up to use the different models and all of that. And then, of course, the technology itself in terms of where you are, what's your current stack, how ready it is the current provider. So all these have to be taken into account. But I think we, as you said, and I'm just going to use your tipping point example again and again, that we are at that point where it's not just enough to have no current state and the goalpost. You have to build a business case now. I think we're probably reaching, if now we are not at the end, we are actually in the last quarter of that
Yeah.
experimentation phase. The budgets are getting tightened, and those hard questions about where has all the AI money gone, and this cool phrase called token maxing is
Yeah.
now becoming becoming a curse for the organization. So, I think this readiness discussion is a difficult one, but that
Yeah.
has to be had. And in my mind, sometimes the answer is going to be maybe for some solving some business problems, you probably are not ready to implement AI, or the AI is not required. It's probably the problem lies in somewhere else in terms of data, process, or talent. That realization has to come from leaders.
Yeah.
And again, it's a difficult role, but it's the role that leadership has to take up.
Well, and it's interesting because you made a couple points there that actually tie to something really interesting that came in one of the comments we received. You talked about the customer that's trying to go from on-prem to something truly modern and involving AI. You also talked about understanding the existing tech stack. Zishan has put in a comment that basically talks about, when you're thinking about leadership at the C level, at the board level, they're not necessarily in a position to provide detailed guidance from a tech
Yeah.
architecture standpoint. And so the comment here is that a lot of the businesses that struggle are trying to deal with the actual underlying architecture in place at the company, that you can't chart that path forward from a leadership perspective if you don't understand where you currently are, what you like, what you have to keep, what you would prefer to change.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those disconnects that, first of all, we have to work with IT. Like, we're going to have to play nice. We're going to have to collaborate on this with IT. This is going to be very important. But having some of these conversations, not just between procurement and the C-suite or the board, but between procurement and other functional leaders, we may have to be nice and get along with IT and the CFO at the same time in order for all of this to be achieved. That in and of itself is a form of leadership. Because sometimes it's not saying, okay, everybody, this way, that's where we're headed. It's asking the question that helps everybody in the room see the challenge in the same context, and it speeds up the time to that solution. I think that's a really interesting point that we got, where we're trying to figure out
Yeah.
what's the strategy, but also how does it connect to the underlying architecture?
Yeah, and I think Zishan brings an important point, and I'm looking at it from different dimension in the sense that I think in that context, AI is different from other probably more incremental technology changes, because
Yes.
here it's such a transformational that leaders have to lead from front, and they need to be hands-on far more than they were. This is not a general sitting in headquarters giving orders to the troops kind of situation. You need to lead from the front. You need to be conversant with these technologies, obviously not from a developer perspective, but at
Yeah.
least as a user perspective. And then you need to be able to, even I'll go to the extent of saying, okay, you need to be able to build a quick agent. I mean, now vibe coding is becoming so popular, it's really not that difficult to build. I'm just saying, like, till you understand and appreciate the gravity of this technology and what it can do, I think it's very hard for organizations to adopt these technologies.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yet it's interesting. One of the things that we hear in a lot of conversations is going back to shiny object syndrome. Everybody says, oh my gosh, this AI is amazing. We can use it to do the procurement process equivalent of build a rocket ship in 24
Yeah.
hours. When in fact, if you remember use case, if you remember business case, if you're focused on ROI and outcomes, Sometimes it's the less glamorous, more tactical, more structured place to apply AI that no, it might not look like a rocket ship and it might be slightly less shiny. But in terms of being able to measure what changed at the end of the day or what was done that what would not have otherwise happened, we always have to challenge ourselves to tie it back to what can we deliver in a reasonable time frame. And it's probably not the shiniest thing in the room. It's probably something a little bit more tactical and manageable, but
Agreed.
nonetheless has a massive impact on the business.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And let's change the gear a bit and then go to the key question that we were discussing before this. Uh, why do people matter in this equation? And I think it's really important question for us to answer. What's your take on it?
I mean, my take on it is that ultimately, as impressive as the technology seems, there are always going to be imperfect, complicated situations when a human being needs to make a decision because the technology either isn't ready, hasn't been programmed yet. Maybe connectivity is an issue. I think, yes, there are a lot of things we can take off of people's plates. We can free up space for strategic thought, creativity, collaboration. But at the end of the day, I think not only does it have to be the human that makes the decision, we talked a little bit about governance. There's always going to be a question of accountability. And
Yeah,
this is where it actually starts to get exciting, but also kind of scary that as much as the tech can step up and help us accomplish things, it's a person's name that is ultimately responsible for every decision made at a company. They're not going to say, oh, whatever version bot made that decision. And so, oh, that bot's fired or that bot's in trouble. We do still need individuals that are qualified
exactly.
and experienced and willing to make a decision. That would be my take on why people matter, despite the level of tech interest. But I'd be interested to know if you think the same, or maybe you're even hearing something slightly different in conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I well said actually, Kelly, but I think it's deeper than that. In my mind, we need to stop thinking of AI as a standalone, working in silo kind of solution. It is still going to be an enablement solution in the sense that it's going to provide you insights, it's going to provide you decision support, it's going to provide you analytics, it's even going to provide you execution. But the human judgment is what's going to
Yes.
drive the ultimate outcome. And I think as a leader, there has to be acknowledgement of this human plus AI paradigm. It is not humans. It is not like, okay, it was humans alone, and now we are moving to AI alone. It is not. It's going to be, at least in near foreseeable future, the world of metrics is far away. So I think right now, you're only looking at human plus AI. That's going to be the important. And in my mind, once that
Yeah.
is appreciated, I think the leaders will be able to take far more pragmatic decisions. And I think, second aspect, and why, again, going back to the question of why people are important, you need to have, once you acknowledge that human plus AI is the paradigm, then you need to worry about workforce readiness from different
Yes.
dimensions. First is obviously, they are the ones who are going to be using the AI solutions. Even before that, they are going to provide that domain expertise to build those AI solutions. How much ever the AI selling companies claim that those are plug and play, they will never be plug and play. There's inherent organization specific domain that comes in. Secondly, to drive that user adoption, you need to have training for your own workforce. And I think, the training has again multiple dimensions in terms of workforce readiness. First is obviously you need to give training. But the one problem that we have heard again and again is, hey, you can give training, but where is the capacity? Current procurement workforce is so stretched and so overwhelmed that unless there is an external force like
Mhm.
leadership acting on that whole situation, you are not going to create capacity for your workforce to be ready for tomorrow's procurement.
No, I think that's an excellent call out. And the reality is, if you're going to be an effective leader, your speech or your messaging and your actions have to be completely aligned. So you can't, on the one hand, say, okay, we're going to have this wonderful new talent development program. We're going to improve everybody's digital literacy. We're going to, I don't know, improve prompting skills, right? Pick what makes sense for your organization.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, we're going to hammer those old-fashioned savings, spend managed,
Yeah.
supplier QBRs, how many contracts were renewed. It needs to work its way all the way into the performance evaluation and metrics that are applied to any one person. It's, we started this kind of talking about leadership from a directional guidance perspective, but in some cases, and I think this is one of those, leadership is making sure that everything is consistent across every form of communication, expectations, and even that form of accountability, so that people really do put in the time or make the time to invest in
Yes,
their own digital literacy to get the benefits out of the tech.
absolutely. And one last point on this is, at least in my mind, is yes, you can have training, you can create capacity. But I feel it's not going to be sufficient. You will still need to hire some AI native, AI first talent. And that's going to be a critical change management for the existing team, because there are two ways the current talent will look at it: as a competition or replacement, or as a complement and accelerator. And I
Yes.
think leaders need to drive that second option and drive the workforce to think, okay, why we are getting this AI native talent is to accelerate this change. They will help rest of the team to adapt to the this new paradigm, new technology, and will be complementary and not as a competition for the existing team. So I think that three-pronged agenda of training, capacity, and AI native talent is what I think will drive the change in the people readiness in my
Yeah.
mind.
And I think it ties back to this point we were making before, where procurement cannot do it alone. Anytime you bring talent, so we've already got IT on the list we've talked about, we've got finance. Now we also have to be working in close partnership with HR, because it is a combination, as you've said, of developing in-house talent, but thinking very carefully about any new recruitment that we end up doing.
Yeah.
The change being ushered in by this technology is so broad and so systemic that, in fact, we really do have to be working across the enterprise. Yes, procurement has our corner of the world, and we have the things that we have the fastest or the most direct control over. But the scope of the change that we're looking at really is something that has to be worked on across the organization,
Yes.
which provides so many of those leadership opportunities, as we've been talking about.
True. True. And that kind of brings me to the thought that, okay, if this is the ecosystem that's getting developed, then what does the procurement professional of AI ready future looks like?
Mm,
And that's where again leaders have to drive the thinking. And maybe I'll just kick it off and then you can chime in. But
sure.
what I'm thinking is there are a few things that are going to remain constant, right? The core skills are not going to go away. In fact, they are going to be foundational to anything that happens in AI ready world. So in terms of understanding of source to pay value chain, core category skills, strategic sourcing, all those fundamentals remain same. But also there is just so much of decision support information that's going to be available, whether it's analytics, market insights, even execution. So they need to be able to leverage that technology. So the future workforce will be the one which uses it effortlessly, and even in some cases, ability to build these agents is what's going to be important. But I think another thing that's important in my mind is big big change that's going to happen is all these execution and analytics and insights oriented tasks are taken. So the procurement workforce has to be ready to be able to scale up to the strategic work, like because there are core things like category management, supply relationship, risk, stakeholder engagement. These are not going to go away. They do need human judgment. They do need human interaction. So as a procurement professional, all of us need to be able to scale up to that and make that as a kind of focus and core work. And hey, I mean, we always complain about this, right? Like 80-20 rule. 80% of
Yes.
the time goes in tactical work. Now there's this great technology that's going to take that away. So can we now make strategic work as 80%, right? That's the key question.
Absolutely. And I think I will say, I will add to what you shared by saying, and critical thought. right? Because the more effortlessly the next generation starts to use AI, the more valuable it becomes to have someone say, we did all this analysis and the answer came back at 12. Does anybody think that seems right? Does anybody have any idea where that came from? Even just maintaining that critical thought process so that the easier the system spits the answer at us, right? The easier it becomes to just do what it says versus taking that as one input, sanity checking, and moving on. I think that is yet another form of leadership that procurement has the opportunity to interject in this whole system.
Absolutely. And as we are coming closer to the end mark, I was just trying to summarize. So, in your mind, what are the three things that audience should take away as a leadership attribute in tomorrow's AI-ready procurement?
So my three things would be, we've talked about so much. I would say, think about leadership in every single capacity. This is not just hierarchical, who's telling people where to go. It's role modeling, it's working collaboratively, right? Leadership takes all different forms. I think it's understanding where are we really talking about tech and where are we talking about process and people. And then the third thing would be that eye to the future. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We have a general sense, but so the more open we can be to generalized skills development, the more open we can be to collaborating with our colleagues in other functions, I think ultimately the better off we're going to be for whatever the world looks like 8 or 12 months from now.
Yeah, that's a great summarization. I'll just add a couple of points from my perspective. I think one thing is there is this, at least in next few years, there needs to be this inherent strength of swimming against the tide and questioning this craze about implementing and introducing AI and everything, and having more business-centric approach in terms of, okay, what's the business problem? How do we solve it? Where does AI fit in? Are we ready for it? What's the preparedness? So thinking of it holistically, I think, is the key thing. And again, it's not going to be easy. You have to stand up to some of the key stakeholders who are going to be far more influential. The other thing is there has to be a strong focus on talent. That's the one that's going to ensure whether you win this AI race or not. So in terms of training, in terms of enabling, in terms of reskilling, in terms of hiring, all of that has to be thought through. So great points, but I think these couple of things I thought will be also equally important. Yeah. So I think we are closer to the end of it. So again, thank you, Kelly, for a great discussion. And thank you everyone who joined us. And before we sign off, I'd like to just remind you that, there's next ProcureAbility LinkedIn live session happening on September 10th. Please make sure you register for it. You follow ProcureAbility on LinkedIn and you'll get the registration and upcoming announcement pretty quickly. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Satyen. Great conversation.
Great conversation, Kelly. Thank you.